Across deserts, jungles, and wind-scoured plains, the bones of impossible projects still rise. Megaliths that lock like puzzles, walls without mortar, tombs whose stones outweigh aircraft. Their makers are nameless, their methods disputed, their purpose half-remembered in myths that refuse to die. Nearly every culture whispers the same refrain: a world-cleansing flood, a reset written in water, while the stones themselves, cut with unnerving precision, hint at skills that don't fit neatly on our timelines. Tonight, we're not just sightseeing among ruins. We're listening for messages chiseled into granite and basalt, clues from societies that might have been swept aside in a single world-changing moment. As always with our videos, the visuals aren't required. Whether you're watching every frame or just listening along, settle in, get comfortable, and let the outside world blur. Together, we'll cross Japan's floating monoliths, Peru's polygonal fortresses, a drowned wall in the Mediterranean, star-reading circles, and the first temples ever raised. What if these stones aren't relics at all, but warnings, maps, and memories? In the quiet hills of Japan, where cedar and mist blur the edges of morning, two enigmas sit as if mid-thought: Ishi no Hoden and Masuda Iwafune. Neither is a household name like Stonehenge or Giza, but both radiate the kind of engineered poise that makes modern masons lower their voices. Start with Ishi no Hoden, the floating stone of Hyogo. At first glance, it feels like a magic trick. An enormous granite mass roughly 6.4 meters long, 5.7 wide, 5.45 tall, appearing to hover just above a reflective pool. The illusion works because a hidden central nub, a stone stalk, bears the load while water conceals the join. The eye reads levitation where the hand would find hard geometry. Yet the trick isn't the point. The point is the finish. Faces smoothed to an almost incidental calm. Edges turned as crisp as folded paper. Planes that meet as if the rock had always intended to be this shape. Stand close and scale breaks. Estimates put the stone near 500 tons, about the weight of 3 fully loaded jumbo jets. In a world where even modern quarries rely on diamond wire, hydraulic splitters, tracked cranes, and weeks of planning to move a fraction of that mass, Ishi no Hoden raises uncomfortable questions with absolute politeness. Tooling signatures are subtle. The surfaces don't scream chisel. They suggest process. If the shaping happened here, where are the waste heaps, the scattered offcuts, the dust-bound detritus we expect from heavy dressing? And if the shaping happened elsewhere, how, across what gradients, did the builders maneuver 500 tons into a hillside cradle and set it down with millimeter tolerance? The answers are not in the literature. Archaeological context is thin. Inscriptions are silent. What persists are stories. Local lore says the stone was fashioned by beings from the heavens, or by an immortal craftsman who finished in a night what 10 villages could not in a lifetime. You can write that off, as myth-making cultures often respond to inexplicable works by magnifying the makers, but even skepticism has to make room for the method. If you dismiss the sky beings, you still have to account for the geometry and the logistics. If you keep the sky beings, you still have to admit the marks look like human effort. Iterative, careful, deliberate. Not far away, in Asuka, a second riddle rests on a slope as if set there to keep the first from getting lonely. Masuda Iwafune, the rock ship, measures roughly 11 meters by 8, by nearly 5, a quarried block squared and faceted into an object that refuses categorization. The top is trenched with twin parallel channels and scooped with rectangular recesses so symmetrical they read as schematics. Foundations, sockets for vanished timbers, a cradle for instruments, a ceremonial stage. Every theory fits if you squint, and none of them feels like the last word. Masuda Iwafune is less about mass than intention. Unlike an erratic boulder left by ice, this stone has been argued into a design. Its planes meet in a measured grammar. Its grooves are consistent, disciplined, clean. The missing puzzle pieces are suspicious by their absence. Where are the chips, the flake piles, the swarf and nodules and working waste? Sites of this scale usually shed their process on the ground around them. Masuda's yard is tidy, as if the workshop swept up before stepping off stage. That observation fuels a bolder speculation. Perhaps the block was shaped somewhere else and moved here. If so, we face the same physics that haunt Ishi no Hoden. Ropes, sledges, levers, earthen ramps. These are not fairy tales. They are proven human tricks. but possible and demonstrated at this tonnage, on this terrain, to this tolerance, are cousins who don't always visit. Folklore keeps pace with the facts. In Hyogo and Nara you hear whispers of teachers from the sea, bright ones from the sky, culture bringers who tuned stone as if it were wood. Myth amplifies talent into miracle, but beneath the glow you can often feel the memory of technique. Imagine a tool you don't recognize, not supernatural, just unusual. Something that softened granite's surface enough to allow a new kind of finish, or a rig that let dozens coordinate a lift at a precision modern crane operators would respect. Give that tool to one generation and lose it in two, and the stories that remain will sound exactly like this, half praise, half astonishment. There is also the water. At Ishi no Hoden the pool hides the bearing point, yes, but water has meaning in Japan beyond camouflage, purification, liminality, the soft border between worlds. If the stone was ritual, as monumental objects often are, then form and function converge. The levitation effect isn't just theater, it is doctrine in granite, an assertion that mass can be persuaded into grace. Masuda's channels invite similar readings. Channels collect, they direct. If they carried posts, they also could have framed light, or shadow, or the flow of liquid offerings, or the placement of something we no longer have a name for. Engineers who visit these sites often leave with two simultaneous convictions: that human hands did this, and that the project management behind those hands was non-trivial. That tension is productive. It forces you to imagine not just tools but systems, apprenticeship lines, quarry logistics, geometry transferred with chords and plumb bobs, and calendrical timing, aligned to seasons when ground was firm and labor plentiful. It also forces you to confront the record we don't have. Japan's early chronicles are careful but not complete. Grand works slip between paragraphs. Entire schools of practice can pass out of living memory in less than a century if they are specialized enough, and the reason to keep them fades. So, what are we looking at? Two stones, each insisting on an author we cannot name. Two problems, each styling itself as sculpture while hiding an engineering exam inside. Two nodes on a map of megalithic expression that stretches well beyond Japan. Because once you have stood under the floating stone and run your palm along Masuda's grooves, you're primed for other encounters. The Peruvian walls where polygon meets polygon without mortar. The drowned blocks off Arwad. The circles that catch solstice sun. The pattern isn't proof of a single vanished culture. It is proof that many cultures found their way to the same sharp-edge precision in service of meaning, and that those meanings were often tied to sky, water, and the measured passage of time. Hold that thread. In the next stretch, we'll climb into the Andes, where stones don't float so much as interlock like living muscle, and where local memory speaks of lightened rock and teacher gods who walked away the day the world changed. High in the thin, brilliant air above Cusco, the first impression is not the view, but the weight. Sacsayhuaman doesn't merely sit on its hill, it clenches it. From a distance, the zigzag ramparts read like stylized lightning. Up close, they become anatomy, stone on stone, curve on curve, a living musculature mortised without a smear of mortar. Blocks the size of buses nestle into their neighbors as if poured to fit. Some with a dozen faces cut to meet a dozen others, the joints so tight you can chase a fingernail along a seam and never find daylight. Figures vary, but the largest boulders are often cited at more than 200 tons. Limestone masses positioned with a confidence that makes modern cranes blush. The walls don't march in straight lines. They sweep, bend, and contour, as if the builders treated geology like cloth and tailored it to the hillside. Stand there and you feel the same double pull we felt in Japan. Human fingerprints everywhere, and yet a process whose full recipe we've lost. Bronze hammers and stone tools can certainly dress limestone. Ramps, levers, and teams of workers can certainly move it. But the questions that crowd your mind aren't about possibility in the abstract. They're about repeatability at this tonnage, on this gradient, with this tolerance, scaled up not once, but again and again, until a fortress becomes a statement. The fit is exacting. The courses rise and fall in subtle waves, and the whole assemblage has shrugged off earthquakes that toppled younger, easier walls below. Engineers point to that earthquake performance with respect. Interlocking polygons distribute force. Irregular faces key the blocks, and the absence of mortar removes a brittle failure point. Whoever refined the method understood not just stone but shock. Ask how it happened, and archaeology gives you labor, logistics, and time plenty of each. Ask the people whose grandparents and their grandparents watched those walls in every season, and you'll hear lore that treats the stone as if it once obeyed different rules. Quechua storytellers speak of Viracocha, the culture bringer who taught arts and sciences and then departed, and of techniques that made rock lighter or soft for a breath before it set. A modern ear tags that as metaphor. But metaphor often grows around a vanished tool. It is not hard to imagine a perishable recipe, a plant resin used as a lubricant, a sonic rhythm for coordinated hauling, a thermal trick that opened microfractures and eased the bite of hammer and wedge going extinct in a generation once its guild dissolved. Follow the sacred valley northwest, and the puzzle clarifies, then complicates. At Ollantaytambo, the wall of the 6 monoliths stands like 6 upright sentences in granite. Each one is vast. Many sources place them around 50 tons, and they were not quarried at the foot of the terrace. Their origin is across the Urubamba, up the face of a neighboring mountain, roughly 7 kilometers away as the condor flies, over slopes that are not friendly to straight lines. However you map the route, there is a river to address, gradients to tame, and switchbacks to negotiate. Even with rollers, sledges, and a small nation of rope handlers, the procession from quarry to platform becomes an epic of friction management and coordination. And then comes the final act, standing each monolith, dressing its sides to lock with its neighbors, and lacing the whole with perfectly fitted spacers, like punctuation between thoughts. Walk the ledges at Ollantaytambo and you'll see the other signature of a deliberate mind, tooling that looks like planning, not panic. Beds are prepared, shoulders align. The blocks do not merely meet, they converse. Taphonomy, the science of what happens after something is built, adds its own quiet testimony. The cuts remain crisp, the seams remain true, and the battered years show weathering but not failure. Legends here echo Cusco's, teacher gods, techniques that vexed the colonial eye, and a sense that the builders cooperated with the stone rather than simply bullied it. So far, our story is high and dry, all altitude and sun. Shift now to salt and a different kind of silence. Off Syria's coast, the island of Arwad keeps its Phoenician bones under modern life, but venture into the surrounding shallows, and divers report a sight that rhymes with the Andes. Large limestone blocks laid in courses, tight seams without binder, the kind of sober, right-angled certainty you associate with a wall and a purpose. Only here the purpose is obscured by the sea itself. A structure that would have stood on dry ground now rests under meters of water, its joints explored by fish, its lines softened by growth. There is an eeriness to masonry underwater. Your eye insists that walls belong to air. What does that submergence mean? The cautious answer is also the honest one. Coastlines move for many reasons. The eastern Mediterranean has felt the heave of earthquakes and the slow hand of subsidence. Harbors silt up, storms rearrange the shore. Long post, Ice Age, sea level rise lifted the world's waterline by more than 100 meters and then kept nudging it. But if you stand on Arwad's quay at dusk and watch the sea, you will understand why flood memory sticks so well to stone. A drowned wall is not theory. It's a demonstration that where people once built, water now rules, and that somewhere between then and now, an event or a knotted sequence of smaller events rewrote the margins. The parallels are uncomfortable enough to be interesting. In Peru, blocks fit without mortar in sinuous courses. In Arwad, blocks fit without mortar in clean lines that now sleep below the surface. In both places, legends bend toward outsized builders and borrowed knowledge. In both, measurements resolve into the same stubborn realities: tonnage, tolerance, and time. If you crave connection, the temptation is to declare a single school that spanned oceans. If you crave caution, you counter that good solutions repeat, because physics doesn't change. In our journey, we won't deny either instinct. We'll keep the hypothesis open and the wonder intact, and we'll let the stones keep telling their side. Up in the Andes, dusk drapes Sacsayhuaman in gold and shadow. Down in the sacred valley, the monoliths of Ollantaytambo hold their line against night. Off Arwad, the sea folds and unfolds over right angles, as if turning a page. 3 sights, 1 chord, mastery of mass to make meaning. Keep that sound in your ear. Next, we go to places where stone becomes a clock, where corridors catch the sun exactly when the year changes shape, and where circles in basalt and turf teach us how old skywatching really is. From the basalt plateau of the Golan Heights, the land looks spare and wind-paired, but elevation can hide intricacy. Rouge Melhiri reveals itself the way a secret does only when you see it from above. On foot, it's rubble and ringlets, dark stone heaped and quiet. From the sky, the pattern snaps into focus. Great concentric circles of basalt, rippling outward from a central cairn like the rings that chase a pebble across a pond. The widest ring spans roughly 160 meters. Together, the walls tally more than 40,000 tons of volcanic rock, moved and placed and aligned by hands that understood geometry without paper. On the summer solstice, the first blade of sunlight slides along a designated line and spears the heart of the complex. The effect is precise without being fussy, like a musician hitting a note cleanly, confidently, at the exact beat. Rouge Melhiri's date lands deep in the early Bronze Age, older than many of the stone celebrities that get more headlines, and its purpose sits at that irresistible crossroads of sacred and practical. You can argue for a calendar, a ceremonial theater, an ancestral compass. You can press your ear against local memory and catch stories of giants who carried stones as if they were gourds, and astronomer priests who read the sky like script. These are not contradictions. In ancient places, sacred and practical often share a spine. To sow on time is to pray correctly. To mark the solstice is to speak with the sun. To align stone with horizon is to bind your year to the great clock above. Cross the sea and the centuries and you find the same spine in Ireland, though the light is gentler and the grass thicker. Newgrange sits in the Boyne Valley like a sleeping god's shoulder under a green cloak. Outside, white quartz glints and curbstones shoulder the mound. Inside, a narrow passage, 19 meters of careful stonework, funnels you to a cruciform chamber that feels older than speech. On almost every surface, carved motifs repeat themselves: spirals, chevrons, lozenges, whirls of energy that seem to breathe when dawn light touches them. Most days, that chamber is night-buried. But at the hinge of the year, the winter solstice, a thin blade of sunlight sneaks through a precisely placed roof box above the entrance, crawls down the passage floor, and stands the chamber in gold for a handful of minutes. Then, it withdraws, and the dark closes as if a lid were lowered. That event is the opposite of an accident. Someone watched the sun for years, charted its path against that particular horizon, calculated the rise angle at that latitude in winter's deep, and then engineered the passage and roof box so that light would arrive not broadly but as a deliberate spear. It's theater, yes, but it is also theology. In the deadest dark, the light returns. Death is a door with a turning key. Even if the chamber held the remains of elite ancestors, an interpretation many accept. The solstice performance converts a tomb into a ritual engine that aligns a whole community to cosmic recurrence. The art participates in the act. Spirals are motion, zigzags are energy, circles are cycles. The chamber itself is a model of recurrence, and for a few minutes each year, the model runs. Now swing to the south of Spain, to the soft heat near Trigueros, where another passage beckons, narrower and earth-tasting. Dolmen de Soto doesn't wear quartz armor. It hides under a low mound like a secret buried in plain sight. Walk its 21 meters inward and you pass carved pillars whose faces carry faint but insistent markings. Spirals, axes, anthropomorphic figures, a lexicon of signs whose exact grammar we no longer speak. Here the trick of light happens not in winter's pit, but on the equinoxes, when day and night balance on a blade. The rising sun reaches straight into the corridor and gilds the inner chamber, throwing living fire over the carved stones as if to wake them. It's a quieter spectacle than Newgrange, but its intention is no less clear. The year has turned. The scales have leveled. Begin again. What ties these places together is not impatience for proof of a single global blueprint, but an evident literacy in the sky that appears again and again wherever people commit stone to meaning. At Rouge Melhiri, the summer solstice opens the circle. At Newgrange, the winter solstice promises return. At Dolmen de Soto, the equinox declares the balance point. 3 different moments on the same clock, 3 architectures tuned to receive them, and all 3 fold the living into the presence of the dead with grace. If you've ever stood in one of these chambers and felt the hair on your arms rise when the light finds its line, you know why such places endure. They teach with spectacle, and they teach with patience. requiring you to witness not just once but yearly, anchoring memory to repetition so securely that even when the language of the carvings goes mute, the light still speaks. The carvings themselves invite the kind of comparison that can get out of hand, but, in moderation, is fruitful. Spirals convene in Ireland, spirals appear in Spain. Geometric patterning shows up on basalt in the Golan and on sandstone elsewhere, a shared appetite for abstracting the world into shapes that the hand can cut and the mind can ride. You can call that convergent symbolism, cultures distilling the sky's cycles and the river's flow into a handful of intelligible signs, or you can flirt with the idea that tales and techniques traveled farther than our tidy models allow. Either way, the persistence is the point. Symbols survive because they do useful work. They compress long observation into portable art. They turn a chamber into a textbook you can walk through. If there is a fresh nuance to add without bruising the mystery, it's this: alignment is engineering as well as ecstasy. To catch a solstice beam in a stone throat, your corridor must resist sag. Your lintels must balance their own weight. Your foundation must drain. Your joints must stay tight through seasons and centuries. At Rujum El Hiri, the massive basalt absorbs heat by day and breathes it by night. Those builders knew what a long summer does to stone. At Newgrange, the corbelled roof is not a guess, but a perfected habit of stacking that turns inward lean into a self-locking dome. At Dolmen de Soto, the passage targeting the equinox sunrise implies not just an astronomical calculation, but site selection that accounted for hills and trees and the seasonal haze of a particular valley. Why does any of this matter beyond the wow? Because when you see stone used as a clock, you begin to read other sites differently. You start to expect intentionality in placement and angle. You search for light slots and shadow marks. You wonder whether engravings cluster where a beam stops on a certain day. The past stops being a museum and starts being a manual, thin on captions but rich in demonstration. And with that manual in hand, we can move forward on our route, deeper into deserts where a single split in a sandstone slab looks too clean to be random, and where petroglyphs lean in like marginalia. Next, we stand before Al-Nazla and ask whether nature sharpened a perfect blade or whether someone guided her hand. In the broad light of the Saudi desert, edges are a kind of miracle. Sand rounds every contour, wind files corners to kind curves, and yet at Tama you come upon Al-Nasla, two sandstone monoliths parted by a line so exact your eye stumbles. The halves are poised on petite plinths like dancers on tiptoe, the split between them running ruler straight from crown to foot, narrow as a blade slipped between pages. Photos make it look edited. Standing there convinces you the edit is real. Up close, the qualities that generate debate stack quickly. The fracture is plane true for meters, the gap nearly uniform, the faces smooth as if planed. Meanwhile, the rest of the rock bears the normal abrasions of time pocks, scallops, the soft fretting you expect from a stone that has listened to wind for ages. Add to that the petroglyphs, stylized figures, animals, marks that read as messages etched by long-gone hands, and Al-Nasla becomes not only an anomaly of form, but a meeting place of geology and story. If the split is natural, why is it so clean? If it is human-made, why is it so geological? Geologists, who have a name for every way rock learns to fail, bring a careful toolkit to the conversation. Sandstone forms joints, natural partings where stress concentrates, often as vertical sheets that tap straight through the rock like the pages of an invisible book. Thermal cycling in desert climates can prime those planes. Sunblast expands the outer skin by day, night cool contracts it, and over centuries that breath loosens grains along a favored line. Add groundwater at some distant point in the past, seeping through a hairline path and quietly precipitating minerals that either harden one side or weaken the other, and you can coax a weakness that will someday recruit a gust, a tremor, or even the weight of its own weathered top to finish the cut. Wind, carrying quartz sand, will then polish the faces, chasing away microteeth until what remains reads as geometry. That is a satisfying story because it needs no miracle, only time. But the human mind does not love edges by statistics. It loves them by narrative. When a split looks this crisp, it invites a tool into the picture. A chisel, a wedge, a wire, a heat line, anything to transform chance into intention. The petroglyphs encourage that turn. They testify that people used this face as a canvas, and once you admit human presence, it's easy to imagine human intervention. Regional folklore, generous with stone feats, mentions masters who could persuade rock to open like bread. The stories are not diaries, they are memory theater. Yet memory theater arises where there is something to remember. Even if the original performance was modest, a crack widened, an undercut refined, a platform trimmed to level. There is a middle path worth sitting with. Partnership. Nature prepares. People edit. Perhaps a joint opened millimeters in an older epoch. Perhaps a block settled on two pedestals as surrounding sand scoured away. Perhaps, centuries later, artists carved nearby and, in doing so, banged loose a chalkstone or smoothed the ledge. In that telling, Al-Nasla is neither wholly engineered nor purely accidental but curated a natural wonder someone recognized and framed, the way builders elsewhere framed a sunbeam with a stone throat. The pedestals themselves have a knack for posing questions. Differential weathering can leave hard caprock perched on softer stems. Collapse can pause mid-gesture if the load is balanced just so. The desert's appetite for undercutting is well known. Still, to see both halves lifted on their own dainty stools feels improbable enough to earn a second, third, and fourth look. Improbable is not impossible. Deserts make a meal of unlikely equilibria. But the sensation of poise mass held lightly echoes the floating trick of Japan's Ishi no Hoden from earlier in our journey. Very different cultures, very different stones, and yet the same visual rhetoric, heavy things that seem to refuse heaviness. What the petroglyphs add, beyond a timestamp of human presence, is a reminder that sites like this were not only seen, they were woven into meaning. A clean split in a monolith is an obvious axis, a door that doesn't open, a horizon made vertical, a mark that suggests measure. Imagine standing between the halves at dusk, the wind threading that narrow corridor, the stone singing its tiny vowel of air. If you were drawing a map of sacred places, you would dot this one. If you were telling a story of origins, you would use the split as metaphor. If you were teaching a child which places matter, you would bring them here and let the geometry do the talking. Skepticism doesn't diminish the awe, it refines it. When geologists propose jointing and thermal fatigue, they are not trying to banish wonder, they are giving it machinery, showing how patient physics can assemble a magic trick. When locals remember stone masters, they are not trying to rewrite physics. They are translating engineering into mythic grammar, which is how communities store knowledge across centuries when manuals are rare and libraries are windblown. In other words, both stories protect the same treasure: attention. Al-Nasla is an attention machine. It makes you look, measure, argue, return. And because our journey is about patterns, not proofs, Al-Nasla fits beautifully into the thread we've been pulling. In Japan, we saw mass presented as levitation. In the Andes, we saw mass interlocked into shock-proof waves. On the Golan and in the Atlantic facade, we saw mass tuned to the clock of the sky. Here, in Tama, we see mass cleaved into pure line, a desert razor honed by time or by hand or by both, and annotated with images that insist people stood here and felt the same double thrum: how and why. That double thrum points us toward Egypt, where, beneath a decorated temple at Abydos, a structure of strict geometry and fierce understatement waits in water, pillars so heavy they seem to root the earth, an architecture that feels borrowed from a culture older than the one that claimed it. Next, we descend into the Osirion. Abydos greets you with color before it grants you silence. The Temple of Seti is a tapestry of reliefs, gods in profile, kings in ritual, paint clinging bravely to carved skin after 3,000 years of sun and breath. But behind that pageantry, there's a door to another mood entirely. Descend past cut stone and the mumble of groundwater, and you come to a chamber that doesn't dress its power, it simply occupies it. This is the Osirion, a sunken rectangle girded by colossal granite pillars, a central island surrounded by water, geometry so sober it feels modern. The change in style is shocking if you've walked the dynastic halls above. Where Seti's temple blossoms with hieroglyphic speech, the Osirion is almost wordless. Its red granite uprights, many estimated near 100 tons, stand as if they grew there, their faces sharp, their edges clean, their joints so exact you begin to suspect the stone of remembering the mason's intentions. The plan is a kind of sacred simplicity, a perimeter of massive blocks, a ring of pillars, a central platform that feels like a stage or a tomb bed, all linked by walkways now interrupted by water that seeps and pools, as if determined to keep the place half hidden. Water changes architecture into theater. It slows you, hushes you, reflects pillars into doubles so that mass becomes mirage. When you remember that Osiris, lord of death and return, of green shoots and black silt, of the Nile's yearly resurrection, is the deity honored here, the staging begins to feel inevitable. Ritual is choreography, and this room's choreography asks you to cross dark water to stand on a central truth, to watch your own torchlight neighbor itself in the pool and tremble. The usual, careful attribution places the Osirion in the time of Seti I, around 1291,279 BC, a kind of cenotaph honoring Osiris aligned to his temple. The stone speaks to that era by association. The proximity makes inheritance plausible, but the site refuses to settle into one timestamp. Its megalithic grammar, the scale of the blocks, the austere understatement, the tight joints without decorative chatter, sits oddly beside the florid inscriptions of the New Kingdom above. Some researchers keep the orthodox line: different functions, different aesthetics. A subterranean monument to a chthonic god would choose severity over story. Others, walking their palms along those edges, mutter a more daring possibility. What if Seti built atop something he revered but did not originate? The Egyptians were curators as well as creators. They said so themselves often enough, speaking of foundations from the time of the ancestors, of places renewed rather than first made. Look closely, and you start to see why those whispers multiply. The Osirion bears scars that read like weather first, ritual second. Stone along the lower courses carries patterns of erosion. Some interpret as waterwork over long spans, the kind of softening you might expect, not merely from a high water table, but from periods of stronger flow or different climate. The comparison many draw controversial but persistent is to the weathering on the body of the Great Sphinx, whose fluted walls some scholars cite as evidence of significant rainfall in a much earlier epoch. This isn't courtroom certainty. Geology in ruins is a soft science. But the visual rhyme is hard to unsee once it's pointed out. Surfaces gentled by water in ways that sand gnawing alone doesn't quite explain. Then there are the stories. Egyptian tradition places the Osirion in the mythic map of origins. Osiris is the hinge god who is killed, dismembered, and reassembled, his body teaching agriculture and law, his death and return sinking human time to the river's breath. Abydos was the axis of that cult, the place where processions reenacted the Passion, where pilgrims came to touch a story that made their fields, their families, their fates intelligible. In priestly lists and king lists, you meet the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, semi-divine rulers said to preside over Egypt before history hardens into stone and ink. Those lines are not blueprints. They are respectful gestures toward inheritances the scribes themselves considered old. But they keep a door open. They say plainly, "We received." If you prefer engineering to myth, the Osirion still leans toward the uncanny. Consider logistics: quarrying granite, hauling near 100-ton blocks across country, lowering them into a pit, and aligning them with a precision that shrugs at millennia of minor shifts. All of that is feasible with New Kingdom tools, ramps, and teams. Feasible is not simple. The plan required ruthless sequencing: dig and shore, drain and stage, lay foundation courses, rig lifts that don't kill your workforce, place uprights that don't wander. And then, the quiet part. Design for water you cannot fully banish. The builders left the monument partially submerged by choice or inevitability. Either way, they engineered for it. Channels manage flow. Thresholds treat inundation as feature, not failure. The result is a room that survives because its designers accepted the site's hydrology and made it liturgy. Stand on the central island, and another pattern hums into focus the international language of megalith. The Osirion's blocks talk to Peru's polygonal walls by way of precision and poise. Different stones, different climates, same refusal of mortar, same balance of mass and tolerance. The understatement echoes what we saw at Masuda Iwafune. Function dressed as form, mystery hiding in plain engineering. And the water-encircled core, a stage surrounded by a moat, quietly mirrors those chambers in Europe that lace light into darkness on a single day, turning physics into parable. You begin to suspect that far-flung builders, without meeting, converged on a short list of ways to make meaning heavy and durable, align it to the sky, marry it to water, bury it until it's ready, cut it so precisely that time becomes a collaborator instead of a vandal. What keeps the Osirion gnawing at the scholarly mind is its refusal to be merely itself. It is a monument and an argument. If it is Holy New Kingdom, then it is an outlier in style that tells us function may dictate a startling minimalism under certain cult imperatives. If it is adopted and adapted from older bones, then Egypt's great habit of conservation and renewal reaches deeper than we like to admit, and timelines ripple. Neither conclusion flattens the wonder. Both sharpen it. In both readings, a culture looked into the dark and built a machine to rehearse return. We cannot yet read all of the room's intentions because water keeps us honest. Much of the Osirion stays submerged most seasons, thwarting excavation, blurring tool marks, caching secrets in silt. The pool edits your curiosity. But there is beauty in that too. A monument that withholds. A god whose cult uses absence as instrument. Osiris, after all, is the one who goes away and comes back different. It's almost right that his house should do the same. Climb out into the sunlight, and the upper temple's painted reliefs feel louder than before, like a chorus raised after a solo. Yet the bass note you carry is granite, those quiet pillars, that uncompromised grid, the sense that you have touched a technique, which either arrived from elsewhere or was born here fully adult. Either way, the next stop in our tour keeps that bass note thundering. To the northeast, in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, stand foundation stones so vast they turn cranes into toys and timelines into questions. Baalbek is waiting. The Bekaa Valley opens in a long, cultivated sigh, the kind of land that seems made to feed empires. Above it, Baalbek gathers horizons and humbles machinery. Most visitors arrive primed for Rome, the soaring columns of Jupiter, the honeyed elegance of Bacchus, the smaller grace of Venus, and they should be impressed. But walk the precinct edge, look down to the platform the Romans chose to inherit, and the scale tilts from grand to elemental. Below the imperial finish lies a grammar that predates it. A megalithic platform whose cornerstone phrases are 3 limestone blocks, so enormous they feel like a joke played deadpan. This is the trilithon, each block estimated around 800 tons, bedded side by side with edges so true you could drag a fingernail across their seams and feel only continuity. The effect is part optical, part visceral. Your eye measures the distance from top to ground and finds the usual. Your body registers mass and mutters an oath. It isn't just that the stones are big, it's that they are big and exact, big and seated, big and aligned to behave together as one thinking unit of wall. Above them, the Romans built what Romans build courses of smaller blocks, concrete cores, decorative bravura, but beneath, the trilithon hums with a deeper intention. A foundation that does not budge makes every flourish above a little braver. The quarry that fed Baalbek's hunger lies not across a continent, but close enough to tease less than a kilometer away, but separated by uneven ground, grades, and the puzzle of lifting and lowering without cracking your prize. It is in that quarry that the site's punchline waits on its side. The Hajar al-Hibla, the stone of the pregnant woman, a monolith of roughly 1,000 tons, one of the largest worked stones known. Further excavations have teased out even larger candidates, half freed from mother rock, as if the workshop once scaled ambition until ambition outran logistics or purpose. You stand on the quarry lip and you can imagine the intended parade. Dress the block in situ, undercut it, cradle it on timbers and rollers, drag at the pace of a heartbeat, then finesse it into the platform where it locks hands with its brothers. You can imagine it, and that imagining is both plausible and punishing. Friction is a tyrant. Leverage is a jealous god. 1,000 tons forgives no miscalculation. Engineers who love difficulties for breakfast point to known tricks. You can multiply human strength with capstans, windlasses, and a forest of ropes. You can grade a road in compacted earth and lubricate it with water and oils. You can build ramps and cribbing to stage each change in height. You can handle a block by canting and pivoting, easing it onto its bed with shims and wedges, and infinite patience. Nothing here is magic. Everything here is margin. The question is not whether a team could move such stones once, but whether a culture could institutionalize the method to the point that 3 800-ton blocks sit side by side like statements in a calmly spoken language. History, for its part, is clear on one point and coy on another. The Roman architects who came to Baalbek in the 1st century CE were virtuosi of concrete and order. They could vault the sky. They were also magpies with taste, happy to nest on foundations they considered worthy. No surviving Roman text claims the trilithon as a Roman feat. Ancient writers like Pliny marvel at great stones in the East as objects of wonder and antiquity, rather than fresh works. Later traditions attribute the platform to Phoenicians or Canaanites, names that gesture not at a specific guild, but at the deep pre-Roman memory of the place. In the absence of a signed work order, the stones themselves are evidence. A style more megalithic than imperial, a silence where you might expect the Romans to brag. Ask the valley's older stories and they answer in the language of more than human hands. Giants stride through Lebanese folklore, beings who stack mountain-sized blocks before breakfast. These tales are not naive, they are proportional. When children of the Roman Empire came up the valley road and saw a platform that dwarfed their own appetite for show, how else were locals to square the ledger but to say, someone larger did this? The giant is a measuring stick you can see from far away. He stands in for training, system, time, and a will to endure. Stand with a mason at the face of a trilithon block and the romance does not evaporate. It shifts, register. The cut looks like work, not miracle. This surface was planned. This arris was protected. These edges were shepherded into a straightness that would still be straight after 100 winters. If you peer close enough, you can convince yourself you see the ghost of tooling strategies, repeated strokes, leveling passes, that habit of leaving a proud safety ridge to be paired later when mating faces met. This is craft the way a symphony is craft. Astonishing because every note depends on every other, not because the instrument defies physics. If anything, the paradox that Baalbek crystallizes is this. The more you respect the stones as the product of technique and organization, the more you can appreciate why stories of giants cling to them. Great works need motives large enough to pay their labor bills. Religion supplies one, a temple is worth centuries. So does statecraft monuments impress allies and intimidate rivals. But there is also a private motive that hums inside the public ones. The desire to make something that will not move when the ground shakes or the calendar flips. Beka is earthquake country. A platform that doesn't flinch earns its keep every few generations. In that sense, the trilithon is not extravagance. It is insurance. Walk the site at the hour when tourists thin and light slides warm along the stone. The columns above glory in their entablatures. The platform below stares back with a poker face. You can hear, if you let yourself, the conversation across time. Roman concrete praising older limestone for its refusal to settle. Older limestone answering by simply being there. The quarry breathes behind you like a sleeping beast. The city murmurs beyond the fence. And you, a small animal among absolutes, find yourself doing what humans have always done in places like this, measuring your own span against a wall that was never meant for your dimensions. We leave Baalbek with a useful tension intact. On one side, a ledger of tonnage, ramps, teams, and tolerances. On the other, a ledger of memory. Giants, heroes, master builders whose names shook off the centuries even if their signatures did not. Between them runs our theme, a respect for systems so effective they feel like sorcery once the manuals are lost. Keep that thought handy as we cross the Atlantic. In the heartland of North America, the monuments are not stone at all, but earth cities mapped in mounds, serpents a quarter-mile long, and alignments that catch the moon's slow breath over nearly 19 years. The materials change. The precision doesn't. In Ohio's rolling green, the ground itself seems to breathe. At Serpent Mound, the earth gathers and rises, curls and narrows, then opens a jaw toward an oval that could be an egg, a sun, a seed, meanings braided so tightly you can feel all of them at once. 400 meters is a hard number to picture until you walk it, tracing the serpent's coils as they taper and swell like a melody. There is no masonry here, no fitted ashlar, no granite pillar, only soil and clay shaped with a composer's patience into a living line that rides a ridge above a meander of water. From the air, the creature clarifies. From the ground, it surrounds. The effect is not lessened by the absence of stone. If anything, the humility of material makes the intention louder. This is a landscape turned into a sentence. Stand at the head at sundown in June, and the serpent stares exactly where the sun drops on the longest day. Walk the coils, and you'll find other correspondences the equinoxes noted, lunar risings and settings teased into the curve like counterpoint. Encoding the sky and earth is slow craft. It demands years of watching, of standing in the same spot through heat and frost, of moving dirt by basket and hand, shaping and reshaping until horizon and effigy conspire to say, now. We tend to speak of ancient astronomers as if they were separate from everyone else, a priestly fringe with eyes only for heaven. But here, the skywork feels communal, a choreography of observation and ceremony where solstice and harvest and story assemble in one place and teach each other. If Serpent Mound is a drawn breath, Cahokia is a city mid-sentence. Across the river from modern street, Louis, 1,000 years ago, tens of thousands lived within a lattice of neighborhoods and plazas, palisades and causeways, a metropolis of the Mississippian world whose pulse you can still detect if you climb Monk's Mound. The platform is almost absurd in its scale, about 30 meters high and covering more than 14 acres, and yet its mass is disciplined. Layer upon layer of basket-carried soil, carefully selected and compacted, creates a terrace system that refuses to slump, a man-made mesa with views designed to command. The whole site answers to alignments that knit it to the sun's cycle. Wood hinges, rings of posts, set as sighting instruments tallied the year with elegant practicality. Urban planning had a celestial syllabus. What gets lost in the shorthand is how technically exact this earth engineering is. To build mounds that large and keep them dry, you have to think like water, shedding it away from slopes and protecting your core against seep. You need soils that knit, not slough. You need layers that drain and layers that lock. You need a labor calendar that obeys the seasons, and an authority structure that can summon hands and feed them. Call it religion, call it governance. The mound itself doesn't care what you name the motives. It proves, by enduring, that someone knew how to bind intention to earth at city scale. Drive northeast, and the geometries grow even more explicit. At Newark, ancient engineers inscribed precision on a canvas of nearly 4 square miles, the largest geometric earthwork complex known. A perfect circle meets a perfect octagon, each side of the 8 equal, the pair joined by embankments broad enough to walk like walls. At human scale, the embankments read as long, level levees of grass. From above, the logic blossoms. The complex tracks the moon's 6-year standstill cycle, marking the extremes of lunar rise and set with an accuracy that gives you pause. To set architecture to the moon is to make patience a civic virtue. No single lifetime watches the entire lesson. Communities remembered where to look and taught their children to witness the return. The astronomy is dazzling, but it's not arithmetic for its own sake. Across the Midwest and Southeast, indigenous traditions speak of the old ones, the people who built and mapped and watched, and of the ceremonial business that kept the sky and the ground in conversation. These aren't fossil stories. They belong to living nations for whom Serpent Mound and Newark and Cahokia are not curiosities but relations, places with responsibilities and rights. In some communities, the serpent isn't an emblem to Instagram, it is a being to greet with respect. In others, the memory of city-scale cooperation guides contemporary stewardship. When to burn prairie and when to let it rest. How to keep water paths clear so earthworks don't drown. How to welcome visitors without turning a ceremony into a spectacle. That living significance matters because it guards against a common error, treating precision as proof of isolation, as if sky mastery belonged to a vanished class of specialists with secret tools we must now recover. The alignments invite wonder, yes, but the way they persist year after year, generation after generation, speaks to social continuity as much as to science. Newark's lunar standstill isn't just a mathematical feat. It's a social contract renewed on a nearly 19-year beat. Cahokia's cardinal vistas aren't just clever sightlines, they are civic habits. Serpent Mound's sunset gaze isn't a one-time trick. It's a loop closed again and again in ceremony, in memory. There is a second caution worth keeping. Not every circle is a clock, not every mound a calendar, not every motif a one-to-one cipher. The temptation to decode can outrun humility. But when alignments are as exact as these, humility includes admitting excellence. The builders watched and they remembered 2 skills that can look like magic when archives burn and languages are outlawed. Oral tradition carries data. If you listen in the key it was sung. If you want a quiet thrill that doesn't cheapen the past with sci-fi gloss, stand at Newark on a clear night and think about time as a practiced craft. Someone set these walls so your grandchildren could witness what you can't. Then look ahead on our route and notice the pattern repeating in different clothing. In Peru, towers that hold their shape against earthquakes guard a high lake and its winds. In China, caverns cut from siltstone mirror cathedrals and sing when you speak, their grooves reading like the pages of a manual no one admits to writing. The medium changes earth to tower, tower to cave, but the theme persists. Systems of method wrapped in ritual, memory made architectural. We've crossed a continent of soil and sky, and left with a new respect for how subtle precision can be when it wears grass instead of granite. Next, we split our path. South to the Altiplano, where cylindrical chulpas rise like sentinels over Lake Umayo at Silistani, and west across the Pacific to the Longyu Caves, where a whole underground city seems to have been carved and then forgotten, its walls striped with tool marks like a fingerprint. Two very different silences, two very similar questions. Who, how, and why here? On the high Andean steppe, where wind carries the chill of far ice, towers keep their vigil above Lake Umayo. Silistani's chulpas rise from a peninsula like a file of sentinels, cylinders of fitted stone whose restraint reads as confidence. Some reach nearly 12 meters. All declare the same intent, precision as piety. Step close and the workmanship sharpens. Blocks are cut to tight radii so the exterior turns in a continuous curve. Joints meet without mortar. Faces are smoothed to a quiet sheen. Many towers taper slightly inward, just enough to shift their center of mass and stiffen them against the sideways punch of Andean earthquakes. The geometry is modest, the effect profound. Buildings that shout tend to fall. These have learned to listen to the ground. Most archaeologists agree the chulpas served as elite burial towers. Inside, mummies were placed in fetal postures, ringed with offerings, food, pottery, small treasures. The kit for a second journey. More than memorials, the towers are machines for preservation. Some feature discrete vents and drains, allowances for air to move and water to leave, a climate control strategy baked into stone. The entrances, when present at all, are small, often facing east and raised, accessible by ladders that are now long gone. You can feel the ritual choreography in the architecture. Approach, ascend, present, withdraw. And yet, the engineering is as much the story as the rite. The slightly battering walls, their subtle inward lean, read like a thesis against time. Courses lock. Gravity kneads the bonds tighter. Many chulpas use larger, better-dressed stones on the exterior and a different core within, controlling weight where it matters, and channeling stress along paths that won't shear under quake or gale. In cross-section, some interiors reveal careful corbelling, the same ancient habit of coaxing horizontal courses into a vault by increments. If you've stood at Sacsayhuaman or Ollantaytambo, this language feels familiar. Function made elegant by obsession with tolerance. Local memory adds a taller story. In Aymara and Quechua lore, beings called Gentiles giants, or simply the Old Ones, are credited with works too poised to accept ordinary authorship. The tales vary but share an aftertaste of catastrophe. A night suddenly brightened by a killing sun, a wave that came like a wall, a people who vanished leaving stone as their last signature. Floods haunt these stories, as they haunt highland geology. Paleoshorelines and lacustrine deposits whisper that water has thrown tantrums here. Lakes have breathed in and out, sometimes quickly. Even if we keep our feet on conservative ground, acknowledging only the known climate swings and local inundations, the marriage of engineering and myth at Silistani feels earned. When water and earth argue, the builders who survive design for forgiveness. From towers that tame sky and quake, we go under the skin of the earth entirely. In 1992, farmers near Longyu in Zhejiang province drained a pond and found a room. Not a natural cave, but a chamber whose walls and ceiling were shaved into planes, buttressed by pillars, and striated everywhere by parallel tool marks so uniform they might be a signature. Then another pond was emptied, and another chamber. Then more. Today, at least 24 of these spaces are known, each cut from solid siltstone, many vast enough to seat a congregation, all sharing the same aesthetic. Pillars left from the living rock to bear the roof. Walls finished with regular, slanted grooves as if a single tool and angle had been standardized across a workforce. Numbers, even approximate ones, ask for a chair. The volume removed to hollow a single hall would fill a small stadium. Multiplied by dozens, the spoil becomes a logistical event. Where did it go? What staging grounds held it? Which ramps and carts ferried it out? And how were the slopes kept from slumping? The absence of debris inside is no surprise. You don't keep your shavings in the violin, but the absence of obvious external spoil heaps feels like a magician's flourish. Either the spoil was repurposed, rammed into embankments, spread to level fields, used in projects now erased, or we haven't learned to read the landscape's edits. The uniform grooves on walls and ceilings are another riddle that looks less magical when you grant the past an engineer's discipline. Standardize your tool pickaxe, adze, or chisel at a set width and angle, and you multiply speed and predictability across crews. The result is a signature pattern that persists even where aesthetics would not demand it, the way a factory's products carry the same machining marks whether or not the customer notices. Walk the halls and speak. The sound tells you as much as the stone. The acoustics are clean. Echo rides columns and returns intelligibly, as if the caverns were tuned not to muffle but to carry. Was that intentional for chant, for music, for spoken ritual, or a byproduct of regular planes? Either way, spaces that answer your voice become habit-forming. The quietest mystery is administrative. China's record keepers are legendarily thorough, yet no surviving text mentions the creation of this underworld. If the caves date to the Qin or Han, as some propose, that silence is perplexing. Major works usually leave paper shadows. If they are later or earlier, the silence remains. No soot mars the ceilings, though lighting would have been mandatory. Oil lamps can burn clean if wicks and oils are chosen carefully, and if smoke is managed. Mirrors and light shafts can assist, but their use would leave architectural fingerprints we have not yet found. It's possible, too, that walls sealed quickly after construction, preserving them from the stains of long use. The caves feel paradoxically new and immeasurably old. Fresh tool lines, ancient patience. What were they for? Hypotheses line up politely: ceremonial halls, granaries, military stores, refuges, quarries executed inside out, but each answers one feature while shrugging at another. The scale argues for state capacity. The finish argues for pride. The lack of artifacts argues for either cleaning or brief occupation. To stand in Longyu is to feel the presence of a manual withheld. You recognize system in the grooves and discipline in the spans, and yet the chapter that begins purpose has been torn out. Silistani and Longyu share more than stonecraft. Both embody the pattern we've been tracing since Japan: precise method embedded in structures whose stories have thinned. Both force us to reckon with organized knowledge that doesn't map neatly onto our timelines or our expectations of who kept records and why. Both make excellent citizens in the same imagined federation as Newgrange, Rujum El Hiri, Sacsayhuaman, Baalbek, and Al-Nasla, places where physics and meaning meet and where cultural memory, mythic or measured, leans heavily on water, sky, or both. Our last stop takes us to the threshold of agriculture itself, to a hill in southeastern Turkey where, 12,000 years ago, people raised pillars that looked like letters in a lost alphabet and then buried them with care. Around Göbekli Tepe and its sister sites at Karahan Tepe and Navali Chori swirl carvings of foxes and snakes, T-shaped stones like standing ancestors, and a quiet suggestion that the first temples may have called the first villages into being, not the other way around. We will also widen our lens to the floods that followed the Ice Age, the drowned margins where coast became seafloor, and the stubborn, shared memory of a world reset by water. On a low hill in southeastern Turkey, the earth keeps a secret it once carefully hid. Göbekli Tepe looks like a farmer's knoll until excavation lays the ground open and the old grammar rises. Circular enclosures framed by T-shaped pillars, some 6 meters tall and 20 tons heavy, arranged as if they were letters spelling a word we no longer pronounce. The stone is alive with reliefs: foxes mid-prowl, snakes knotted into caution, boars, cranes, scorpions, vultures, each carved with a surety that makes you forget the date for a moment. Then the number returns like a bell. 10th millennium BC. 7,000 years before Stonehenge, 6,000 before Giza. The neat evolutionary order we prefer: villages first, then surplus, then temples finds itself politely reversed. Here the temple looks like the cause and the village, the effect, as if ritual gathered people and, by gathering them, invented settlement. The pillars themselves read as anthropomorphic, the crossbar a head without a face. On some, hands and belts are carved along the shaft, the body implied rather than shown. A recurring symbol turns up that now has a passport stamped across continents. A small, square-topped bag, the handbag, held in stylized hands or hovering among animals. You can chase that motif into Mesopotamian reliefs, into American stelae, into carvings half a world away, and make yourself dizzy with connection. Maybe it's a bucket, a seed bag, a vessel for rule or rain or order. Maybe it's a portable icon for what we carry forward, knowledge compacted into a shape. Whatever it is, it travels well. What rescues Göbekli Tepe from pure romance is the discipline of its site history. After centuries of use, someone buried it. Not collapse, not drift burial. Enclosures were infilled deliberately, pillars tucked to sleep beneath layers of debris that read as purposeful backfill rather than ruin. It is hard not to hear an elegy in that act, or a reset. We learned what we came to learn. Close the book and keep it. That tone repeats at sister sites. East at Karahan Tepe, more T-pillars rise from bedrock courtyards, with a sunken chamber whose heads push from the walls as if a human crowd had become architecture. At Navali, Chori, now drowned by a dam excavation, before inundation revealed its own T-pillars and reliefs, a family resemblance that suggests a broader cult or network rather than a one-off genius. The style feels like a school. The school feels like a movement. Step back from the pillars and the sky reasserts itself. Alignments at these early sanctuaries aren't theatrical in the Newgrange sense, a single beam on a single day, but the carvings and the ringed plans speak a similar language of attention. Vultures and snakes and foxes are not random. They are the cast for ritual, the mnemonic for seasons, the star names handed to children so they can remember where the world turns. The First Temples Then Towns thesis doesn't just flatter religion, it dignifies observation. If people gathered to watch the heavens and repeat the watching with form and feast, then agriculture could have been the side effect of scheduling. Meet here, then meet again when the fox rises. Sowing and harvest slip in as subordinate ceremonies to the main rite, showing up on time together. All of this would be extraordinary even if the planet had stayed put. It didn't. Between roughly 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, the Ice Age exhaled. Ice sheets melted. Sea level climbed more than 100 meters. The shoreline we think of as natural is a newcomer. Continental shelves that were once savannas are now fisheries. River deltas walked by, families are submarine fans. The change didn't come as a single wall of water but as a braid of pulses and pauses. Some pulses were violent. Storm surges rode higher seas into villages that had never seen water like that. Land subsided in places and jumped in others. Coastlines redrafted themselves. Is it any wonder that nearly every mythology on Earth remembers a flood? The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Hebrew Bible, stories from China of landscape reshaping inundations, Aboriginal songlines that map shorelines now offshore, North American traditions that describe waters sweeping a corrupt world, clean the song's rhyme even when the singers don't meet. Divers find hints along the margins. Off Yonaguni in Japan, terraces and steps that look painfully intentional to the eye that wants them to be. Off India's coast at Dwarka, ruins that suggest planned habitation in water that was air within human memory. Underwater archaeology is cautious because sea can sculpt illusions, but the pattern is stubborn. People built near coasts, coasts moved, memory flooded, and then fossilized as story. Does that add up to a single global megalithic civilization erased by cataclysm? It's tempting to say yes, because the stones talk to each other across oceans. Polygonal walls in Peru, trilithons in Lebanon, solstice corridors in Ireland and Spain, basalt circles in the Golan, a knife-edge split in Arabia, sky-literate mounds in Ohio, pillars in Anatolia, rock ships and floating stones in Japan. The symbols rhyme, the methods rhyme, even the myths rhyme. Tempting isn't proof. Convergence happens when different hands solve the same problems under the same sky with the same physics. A tight joint is how you beat the earthquake. A solstice beam is how you nail a calendar to a wall. A cylinder that tapers is how you keep a tower standing. A buried sanctuary is how you retire a power without destroying it. But skepticism that breathes still leaves the door ajar. You can propose a looser network, ideas traveling like seeds, by drift, by bird, by boat, swapping techniques and symbols in pulses across millennia. You can propose that flood pulses erased coastal pages that would have clarified the conversation. You can honor indigenous and local custodians who tell you, calmly, that their ancestors knew things we have only just relearned to notice. You can hold the wonder without letting it bully the evidence, and hold the evidence without letting it dim the wonder. So what are we left with as we climb out of Göbekli Tepe's trenches and look back across our route? A world full of messages in stone and soil. Japan's poised monoliths, Peru's earthquake-wise walls, Arwad's drowned courses, circles that tell time on the Golan and in the Boyne, a desert split like a drawn blade at Tama, Abydos's granite understatement, Baalbek's immovable ledger, earth that breathes at Serpent Mound and Newark, towers that refuse to fall at Silistani, cathedral caverns of Longyu, pillars at the dawn of agriculture in Anatolia. Every site is a proof of concept for human attention to sky, to water, to time, to tolerance. Every site is also a cliff note in a longer story, whose middle chapters may lie under silt, surf, or the polite forgetfulness of history. We'll end where we began, with the feeling that the past is not passive. It is a conversation partner who lets you do most of the talking until you ask the right question. Maybe the right question is not, who were the giants? But which systems did ordinary people master so thoroughly that their work still feels giant today? Maybe the flood isn't a single event, but a curriculum teaching resilience, humility, and the wisdom to place meaning where tides can't reach it, or to bury it when scattering is safer than survival. Now it's your turn. Which site changed your mind? Do the global flood memories point to real, late catastrophes, or to the long breath of the sea after ice? Are the shared carvings a common alphabet, or a shared human instinct under one sky? Tell us in the comments. If this journey through stone and story resonated, like the beam at Newgrange finding the chamber, tap like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next expedition into the old puzzles. Until then, stay curious.